And here we are today with Louise Edwards, printmaker. Thanks for inviting us, Louise. Can I start by asking, where do you find the inspiration for your work?
I always say it's kind of like a diary of my life, just in pictures, because it's always things that have happened to me or I've encountered. And generally it's, me and my husband love feeding the garden birds and watching the birds from, our living room. If I see something, a thrush or something in the garden, you can guarantee that it'll end up in a print. In particular, when we first moved in, there was a blackbird that would sit on a cotoneaster that was here originally, and he'd sit on top of this cotoneaster. No other bird could get near the berries, and he'd defend it to the hilt. And then one day in the middle of winter, he just stripped the whole lot himself. And that was the origin of the Defence of the Realm print that I've done, that's been, really popular with people because it has this little story behind it. I think probably being creative has started with my family. My grandfather was the director of overseas sales for Minton and Royal Dalton, so obviously he used to bring a lot of his work back, and it was quite interesting to see the different patterns and what they were working on. And then my mother did a lot of watercolour painting. And my father was trained as a silversmith in Birmingham. And then when I left school, my first job was as a glass painter, and that just ended up being what I really enjoyed doing. So my friend's mother, she did printmaking, and she sat me down one day when I was very young at the kitchen table with some lino cutting tools and some lino, and was introduced to lino cutting for the first time. And I loved it because I loved reading, I loved books, and I loved illustrations in books. And when I saw the print that came out, I thought, this kind of has that feel, and suddenly realised, printing was this thing. And I loved the fact that those magical pictures that you saw in children's books that I would spend hours looking at, that was how it was done. And I loved the fact that although I wasn't able to recreate them, there was this magic that happened when you pulled the print and saw that the drawing that you'd done was now somehow completely different and had an extra sort of dimension to it, and I loved that and always wanted to come back to it. So what I'm going to show you initially is just basic printmaking, so how the marks work and how that comes out as a print. So if we just take a piece of this, is just bog standard battleship grey, as I say, with the Hessian on the back. It's quite firm, but you can heat it up and make it a little bit more pliable. And then these are my file tools, so you pop that into your palm. And then what you're generally trying to do if you're using just one colour, obviously the more you take away, the lighter that area is going to be. So it's similar to just drawing with a pencil, really. It's just that it's in reverse. So obviously this area will be lighter when it's been printed than the area around it. So for, if you wanted to sort of lighten it, you could use cross hatching. You could use multiple lines, and obviously the closer they are together, the lighter that area is going to be. If we went further apart, that would be a little bit darker, and then you can cross hatch, you can use little dots, and part of deciding what marks you're going to make is part of the joy of printmaking, really. It's like painters' brush strokes, they're all different, and everybody makes their own choices, and that's part of the pleasure of it, really. We've got different tools, some of the larger ones that will take away a lot more of the area. And so I usually say it's like potato printing for grown-ups, because it's exactly the same. It's relief printing as opposed to intaglio, where the the ink would sit in the lines. This is relief printing, so the ink's going to sit on the surface that you haven't cut away, just the same as potato printing. I tend to use the V gouges more for straight lines or lines that I want to be, even if they're on a curve, I want them to be a nice smooth curve, and tend to use the U-shaped gouges for more wiggly lines and curvy parts.
Painting is, you have a, let's say, paper, and you're applying paint to it on top of it. But with printing, you're actually doing the opposite, aren't you? You're cutting away.
Yes, I mean, if you think of it like drawing with a white pencil in the most basic form, every line that you take away is going to be white pencil on a black paper, say. And I think initially everybody struggles probably with that reversing of the image, reversing of the colours, and we all make the obvious mistakes of, you know, lettering being the wrong way round when you print it, buildings being the wrong way round, and then you quickly realise, oh gosh, I've done it, you know, and you don't do it again. I think once you've got into that mindset of being a printmaker, it becomes second nature, and you're in that mindset of, you know, I'm taking away this, and especially with reduction printing, which is what I mostly do. So we've gone from just the basic one colour print like this, and this is a block that I'm partially part of the way through now. So the first stage would be to take away any parts that you want to remain the colour of the paper that you're using. So that's usually the lighter colour, not always, but it's usually the lightest colour. And you would take away those areas, ink up this block, print as many as you would like, plus some for errors. And then the next time we come back to this block, we're taking away the areas that we want to remain that light colour that we've just printed. So as you can see on here, I've done, what are we on now, about 4 layers from this block already, so it's starting to get eaten away, gradually getting darker with the inks as we go along until we get to the darkest. And so obviously there's no going backwards and reprinting any, because you've essentially ruined the block as you've gone along. You've taken it away, so it will never sort of go back to being a single block like that.
It's sometimes called suicide printing, isn't it?
It is sometimes called that, because there's no coming back from it. What you've done, you've done. If you make a mistake, you can either try and make it look like you intended that to happen, or you can just, you know, forget it and start again. But that's where the preparation comes in, and designing your image properly, deciding where the colours are, and making sure that you know exactly where you're going. And you know, this is probably for me one of the most enjoyable times, when I'm just sitting here whittling away at my lino and you know, just making sure that everything's going to plan. Inking up is a really important part of the printmaking process, and it's one of the stages that things can go very wrong, and I don't think that people quite realise how important it is. So if I just pop some of my ink out onto here. Black ink is one of those really highly pigmented, so the different inks have different levels of pigmentation as well. So if you're mixing colours, you have to remember that you may not need, you know, as much blue as you need yellow and things like that. But when you've got your ink out of the tube, always give it a good mix and soften it, and make sure that it's nice and smooth, because what you also find is that the weather has an effect. So in the summer, printmaking can be lovely and easy, and everything can go smoothly because it's nice and warm. So there we go. So what I'd just do is just don't dip your roller into your ink. That's another, we get a big blob of ink in one spot. We don't like that. So nice little piece of ink across there. And then what we're going to do is lift the roller. When we get to the end of the run, lift it. Don't just go backwards and forwards, because we're just going to get from there to there that's inked, and then the rest of it won't be. So lifting and rolling. I'm going to put just a little bit more on there. And you tend to find that you get a nice sound when you've got the right amount of ink. So you can hear that tackiness. There's like a little sort of hiss that comes from having a nice amount of ink on there. And then when you come to ink your block, obviously we've burnt away the hessian around the edge, because you don't want to have a lovely print and then find that you've got a little blob on the side from the hessian. And so when we're inking, don't go backwards and forwards and all over the place, because you'll smudge ink into your finely cut lines. So we're doing one pass, we're bringing it back and do another pass. Ink up again. And we're just going from one end to the other, and then you can do it in different directions if you find that certain areas. And what you'll find is, see a little bit of fluff there. A few more layers, thin layers, is better than one big thick layer of ink, because at the moment you can see on there that we've still got nice clean edges. We haven't got so much ink that it's blobbing over into the finer cuts, but you can also see, you know, if you tilt it into the light, you can see that you've got a good coverage. So we'll just print this little test piece here. I don't need the registration pins, because obviously it's just a one-off little single colour. So we've got some Somerset satin paper here, which is printmaking paper. Some people use a blanket. I don't use a blanket simply because some people like the sort of what they call chatter in the background. So the areas that you've cut, it can pick up some of the lines in that, and that looks great. You know, some people's work, it looks great, and they've got all movement from the chatter. I just simply doesn't work with mine, and I like to get it as clean as possible. So I use a cutting board, so that just sits on the top of the lino without sinking in at all. You could use your spoon or whatever you're going to use to print, your paperweight, you know, lovely glass baron, whatever it is that you've got. I'm lucky enough to have my press here, and then, like I said, you know, I don't know what it is that happens with printmaking, but something magical happens between then and now, and you get a lovely little picture. I mean, that's only, you know, it's just practice mark making, but to me, I just think it's wonderful. You know, I personally think you could put a little mount round that, put it in a frame, put it on your wall. I think it looks fantastic. There's something magic in printmaking that just excites me, and I could just do it all day. I love it. Just talking about registration of the images, because obviously if you're going to be adding a layer over another layer, they've got to be very well registered. And I use something called Burton pins. So these are the little metal pins that you get, which I've stuck down onto a board with some good old duct tape, because that's not going to move. And so you get little tabs that fit onto there, that you will attach to your piece of work. So here we've got the one that I'm part way through, and that's got the tabs attached. So just making sure that you've got enough room where you've taped them, that you're not going to affect your image.
So that means that when you do the different layers, they're exactly the same.
And obviously your paper has to be in exactly the same place, but also your lino has to be in the same place. So your matrix, which is your lino, I've got just a little metal right angle here, and that sits in there, you know, pushed over to the corner so that it can't move. So that's in the same spot. I've got my little taped on tabs for my Burton pins, and they sit on there, and so each time I know that it's going to be in exactly the same position. So if you look at this one that we're part way through, you know, you can tell by things like this. So this white area, obviously that's the paper, so that has been white all along and has had what, 1, 2, 3, 4 layers printed, and we've still got a nice crisp white line around those. The bubbles are nice and crisp, so that's been in exactly the same position each time, so we're happy with that.
If someone was just starting out in printing, What would you recommend get this started with lino or a more forgiving material to begin with?
To be perfectly honest, the first thing that I would say is just have a go, because I get so many people coming to me and saying, oh, I've got all the equipment, but I just can't, like, they're a little bit scared, like something's going to happen when they have a go, or they might not be as good at it as they're hoping they're going to be. And I always say, just have a go, because even if you take a child's drawing, something magical happens in that process of printmaking. And if you take that picture, mount it and put it on a wall, it's going to look fantastic, because all printmaking is just fantastic. It just is. Something happens. And I don't know what that is, but it's a little bit of wizardry that happens. And so first thing, just have a go. Doesn't matter what you're printing, just have a go at it and you're going to love it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.